April 1969. Montgomery carried heat differently than northern cities. The air did not simply feel warm. It felt heavy, as though history itself remained trapped beneath the streets, sweating upward through concrete and brick. Outside the Montgomery Coliseum, thousands of fans pressed toward the entrances beneath bright southern lights. Teenagers screamed Elvis Presley's name before even seeing him. Cars stretched for blocks. Police officers leaned against barricades, smoking cigarettes, while vendors sold programs and cold Coca-Cola bottles beneath flickering signs. From the outside, it looked like any other successful concert stop on a legendary American tour. But backstage, the atmosphere felt wrong. Not nervous, dangerous. The kind of tension human beings recognize instinctively before anyone explains it aloud. Inside dressing room 3, Elvis Presley sat unusually still beneath harsh mirror lights. That alone disturbed people around him, because Elvis hated stillness before performances. Normally he paced, joked, tapped rhythms against furniture, moved constantly like nervous electricity trapped inside skin. Tonight he barely spoke. Sweat darkened the collar of his white performance suit, even though the room remained cool. One elbow rested against his knee while his eyes stayed fixed on the dressing room door, listening. Not to music, to the crowd. The sound arriving through concrete walls no longer resembled applause. It resembled pressure. Colonel Tom Parker noticed it too, though he would never admit fear openly. The colonel stood near the far side of the room, smoking heavily while pretending to study paperwork. But every few minutes, his eyes drifted toward the hallway outside, toward security, toward the building itself. Because everyone inside the touring staff understood exactly where they were. Montgomery, Alabama. 1 year after Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. One of the most politically volatile places in the American South. And tonight, 4 black women would stand openly beside the most famous white performer in America beneath full arena lights. Not hidden, not behind curtains, visible, celebrated, equal. The Sweet Inspirations understood the risk better than anyone. Myrna Smith adjusted one earring slowly while staring into the dressing room mirror. Estelle Brown sat quietly beside a makeup case with her hands folded tightly together. Sylvia Shemwell pretended to review sheet music she already memorized months earlier. And Emily "Sissy" Houston, mother of future superstar Whitney Houston, stood near the wall, breathing carefully through nerves she refused to show publicly. None of them were strangers to racism. America had trained them for that since childhood. Hotels suddenly losing reservations, restaurants suddenly closing kitchens, audiences applauding their voices while refusing to shake their hands afterward. But tonight felt different. This wasn't hidden discrimination wrapped politely in smiles. This felt combustible. Security guards moved constantly through backstage corridors, carrying radios and speaking in hushed voices. One guard quietly informed Colonel Parker that arguments had already broken out near concession areas between attendees before the show even started. Parker cursed under his breath, not because he cared morally, because controversy threatened revenue. That was always the colonel's true religion, money. And tonight, money suddenly felt fragile. Elvis finally stood. The room fell quiet immediately. Even after years of superstardom, his presence still altered spaces instinctively. He looked first toward the Sweet Inspirations. Really looked. Not as employees, not as performers, as people. For one brief second, Elvis no longer resembled the untouchable king of rock and roll. He looked like a tired Southern man carrying a decision heavier than fame. "We go out there together," he said softly. Nothing dramatic, no speech, no performance, just one sentence. But everyone in the room understood its meaning immediately. If something happened tonight, he was choosing sides publicly. The arena lights dimmed, the crowd exploded. The roar hit backstage walls hard enough to vibrate mirrors. A stage manager shouted final cues. The band moved quickly toward positions. Elvis adjusted the cuffs of his white suit once, then stepped toward the curtain. The sweet inspirations followed behind him, and together they walked into one of the most dangerous nights of Elvis Presley's career. The audience erupted instantly. 35,000 people screaming beneath giant overhead lights, flashbulbs exploding like lightning across darkness. The opening chords slammed through the Coliseum loud enough to shake metal railings. For the first 15 minutes, everything worked. Elvis moved with familiar fire. Sharp hips, fast footwork, sweat flying from his hair beneath rotating spotlights. The sweet inspirations lifted every chorus behind him with rich gospel harmonies that wrapped around the music like smoke through church windows. And the audience reacted. Some fans screamed louder whenever the women sang. Others remained seated stiffly with crossed arms, watching, evaluating, refusing enthusiasm. Elvis noticed every single face. That was the burden of superstardom. Performers eventually learned to read crowds like weather systems, and tonight he could feel a storm hiding somewhere inside the building. Then came Suspicious Minds. The arena detonated with applause instantly. People jumped to their feet. The rhythm rolled hard through the Coliseum while Elvis attacked the lyrics with raw emotional force. The sweet inspirations answered behind him powerfully. Voices soaring, drums hammering, the building trembling beneath music large enough to temporarily overpower fear itself. For one brief moment, it felt safe again. Then the band hit a tiny break in the arrangement, 1 second of silence between sounds, and from somewhere deep inside the darkness, a man screamed the word. The racial slur cut through the arena like broken glass, loud, clear, vicious. Everything stopped. The drummer froze mid-motion. A guitar note died unfinished beneath the lights. Elvis's mouth remained inches from the microphone without sound emerging. 35,000 people turned simultaneously toward the stage, toward the sweet inspirations, toward Elvis Presley. Myrna Smith's eyes filled instantly. Cissy Houston lowered her head for one shattered second before forcing herself upright again. Sylvia Shemwell gripped the microphone stand tightly enough for her knuckles to pale beneath stage makeup. Estelle Brown stared into the audience without blinking, because they all understood the same terrifying truth. What happened next would matter more than music. Elvis stood completely still beneath the spotlight. The entire arena waited. He could ignore it, restart the song, smile, protect the tour, protect the money, protect himself. Thousands of celebrities before him had survived through silence, and for one long second, America held its breath, waiting to see which version of Elvis Presley existed beneath the white suit. Elvis Presley heard the slur clearly. There was no possibility he misunderstood it. The word echoed through the Montgomery Coliseum with such ugliness that even people sitting far from the stage physically flinched when it landed. And suddenly, 35,000 people were no longer watching a concert. They were watching a decision. Elvis remained motionless beneath the spotlight. The microphone hung loosely in his hand. The white suit that looked glamorous minutes earlier now seemed almost painfully bright against the darkness surrounding him. Behind him, the sweet inspirations stood frozen near their microphones. Myrna Smith fought tears already rising into her eyes. Sylvia Shemwell stared forward rigidly, refusing to let the crowd see pain break across her face. Estelle Brown's breathing turned shallow, and Cissy Houston, who had survived enough racism to recognize danger before it fully arrived, quietly understood the next few seconds might follow all of them for the rest of their lives. The crowd waited. Some people looked uncomfortable already, others looked curious, and somewhere inside the lower sections, the man who shouted the slur laughed once. A sharp, ugly sound, confident, because men like him spent entire lifetimes believing silence meant agreement. Elvis slowly stepped forward. One step, then another. The arena became so quiet people near the front later swore they could hear the leather soles of his shoes against the stage floor. Colonel Parker felt immediate panic backstage. He moved toward the curtain instinctively, not because he cared about morality, because he understood money better than anyone in the building. And this felt financially catastrophic. Southern sponsors, radio stations, venue owners, ticket sales, all of it suddenly hanging above a cliff edge. Parker whispered harshly toward a stage manager, "Start the damn song again." But nobody moved, because all attention belonged entirely to Elvis Presley now. Elvis reached the very edge of the stage and looked into the darkness where the voice came from. Not angrily at first, carefully, as though searching for something. And when he finally spoke, his voice arrived low enough to force the entire building into deeper silence. "Whoever said that," a pause. "Listen carefully." No screaming, no theatrical outrage. That made it worse. Controlled anger always feels more dangerous than shouting. The crowd tightened collectively. Some audience members shifted nervously in their seats. Others leaned forward, because now everyone understood something irreversible had already begun. Elvis turned slowly toward the sweet inspirations. The women looked back at him with expressions somewhere between fear and disbelief. Then he faced the audience again. "These women are not decoration." Another pause. "They are artists." His voice tightened slightly. "They are my friends." And then the sentence that split the arena in half forever. "They are my family." The reaction inside the Coliseum became immediate and chaotic. Some people exploded into applause. Others booed instantly. A man near the lower aisle shouted something angry about politics. Someone else screamed, "Sit down and sing!" Security guards moved quickly through the crowd now, scanning for fights before fists started flying. But Elvis did not retreat. That was the part nobody expected. Most celebrities understand conflict mathematically. Protect the audience, protect the image, diffuse tension, return to entertainment. Elvis Presley instead walked deeper into confrontation deliberately. "If any person in this building thinks they can insult my family," he pointed slowly toward the arena exits, "those doors are open." The sentence hit the crowd like a physical impact. Some people froze completely. Others stood immediately in outrage. An older white man near Section B ripped an Elvis button from his jacket and threw it onto the concrete floor before storming toward the aisle. His wife grabbed his arm, desperately trying to stop him. He pulled free and disappeared into the tunnel without looking back. Elsewhere, a black couple near the front rows began crying openly while applauding. The arena no longer resembled entertainment. It resembled America itself tearing open under lights. Behind Elvis, the Sweet Inspirations remained stunned. For years they survived racism professionally through controlled silence. Smile politely, finish the performance, protect the paycheck, move on. That was survival. Nobody stopped arenas for them. Nobody risked careers publicly for them. Especially not in Alabama. Especially not in 1969. Myrna Smith pressed trembling fingers against her mouth, trying to stop herself from crying harder. Cissy Houston lowered her eyes briefly, overwhelmed by something even more frightening than hatred. Protection. Because genuine protection from powerful people was so rare, it almost felt unreal when it finally appeared. The audience noise continued, spiraling unpredictably. Cheering, booing, arguments breaking out between rows, security radios crackling urgently near the walls. One guard later admitted he genuinely believed violence might erupt across the lower sections. And through all of it, Elvis Presley stood perfectly still at center stage beneath the white spotlight. Sweat rolled visibly down his neck now. Not performance sweat, pressure sweat. The kind created when a human being realizes the next sentence may permanently alter how millions of people see them. Then something unexpected happened. From high inside the upper seating, one voice began singing softly. "We shall overcome." Fragile, almost shaking. The sound drifted uncertainly through the arena. Then another voice joined. Then another. Within seconds, entire sections slowly began singing together, uneven at first, then stronger. The civil rights anthem rose through the Montgomery Coliseum like something ancient, finally forcing its way into open air. People stopped arguing just to listen. A security guard near the western aisle lowered his radio slowly. A teenage girl in the front rows grabbed her father's hand while crying openly. Even some audience members who clearly disagreed politically remained seated in stunned silence because the emotional force filling the building had become impossible to interrupt cleanly. Elvis looked genuinely shocked. The Sweet Inspirations looked devastated emotionally. And somewhere near the back exit, several angry attendees simply walked out because the room no longer belonged to them anymore. The singing spread slowly at first. Not perfectly, not beautifully, but honestly. We shall overcome. Thousands of voices rising unevenly through the Montgomery Coliseum, while tension still hung over the building like smoke after a fire. Some audience members sang proudly. Others whispered the words uncertainly, almost embarrassed by their own emotions. And some remained completely silent, arms crossed, faces cold, refusing participation. But even silence had changed now. Earlier in the night, silence belonged to fear. Now it belonged to people realizing they were losing control of the room. Elvis Presley stood motionless at center stage, listening to the anthem echo around him. The spotlight reflected against his white suit so brightly it almost hurt to look at directly. His eyes looked wet beneath the stage lights. Not dramatic tears, the restrained kind older Southern men spent lifetimes trying not to show publicly. Behind him, the Sweet Inspirations no longer resembled backup singers waiting politely for cues. They looked emotionally shattered. Myrna Smith wiped beneath one eye quickly before makeup fully smeared. Estelle Brown pressed trembling fingers against the microphone stand just to steady herself physically. Sylvia Shemwell lowered her head briefly as if overwhelmed by the sheer impossibility of the moment unfolding around them. And Cissy Houston, future mother of Whitney Houston, simply stared at Elvis with an expression no audience member fully understood then. Years later, she would describe it as, "The first time I realized somebody powerful was willing to lose something for us." That was the difference. Protection always costs something. Otherwise, it is only performance. As the anthem grew louder, people throughout the arena began standing one section at a time. A black couple near the lower rows embraced openly while singing through tears. An elderly white woman removed her glasses and cried silently beside her husband. Two teenage boys, who earlier shouted complaints during the confrontation, now stood awkwardly without speaking, because the emotional force inside the building had grown too large for mockery. Even several security guards stopped pretending detachment. One guard near the east tunnel quietly sang along beneath his breath while still holding his radio. Meanwhile, Colonel Parker looked furious. Backstage, he paced near the curtains, smoking aggressively while muttering calculations under his breath. Lost sponsors, Southern backlash, television criticism, threats, canceled venues. Parker understood something terrifying before almost anyone else. This moment would survive the concert itself. Tomorrow morning, newspapers across America would not discuss choreography or ticket sales. They would discuss race. And Elvis Presley had just publicly chosen a side in Alabama. In 1969, under cameras. The song finally faded. Silence returned slowly afterward, heavy, emotional. Nobody moved immediately because nobody fully knew what reality looked like after a moment like that. Elvis wiped beneath one eye quickly with the back of his hand, then turned toward the sweet inspirations. His voice came softer now. "What do you ladies want to sing?" Confusion spread instantly across the band. This was not rehearsed. Elvis concerts operated with military precision. Every minute planned, every transition timed. Colonel Parker hated unpredictability almost as much as financial risk. And tonight, Elvis Presley had already detonated both. Cissy Houston stepped forward carefully, still emotional, still breathing unevenly. She leaned close and whispered something into Elvis's ear. He listened, nodded once, then walked toward the bandleader. "Play it," Elvis said quietly. Several musicians exchanged nervous looks immediately. One guitarist glanced instinctively toward Colonel Parker, waiting near the curtains. Parker shook his head sharply, but Elvis ignored him completely. Then something happened no audience inside Montgomery Coliseum ever forgot. Elvis Presley stepped away from center stage and gave it entirely to four black women. The opening chords of "People Get Ready" drifted softly through the arena. The atmosphere transformed instantly. The sweet inspirations walked slowly toward the front of the stage together. Not behind Elvis anymore, not background voices, not hidden support, visible, central, human. The spotlight widened around them. And then they sang. Not cautiously, not politely. They sang like women finally releasing years of exhaustion buried beneath professional smiles. Every note carried history inside it. Humiliation, faith, survival. Pain swallowed silently through years of touring across segregated America. Their harmonies rose through the Coliseum with such emotional force that conversations stopped mid-sentence across the building. People simply stared. And perhaps the most unforgettable image of the night stood several feet behind them. Elvis Presley, silent, watching protectively from the shadows, while four black women led the entire arena beneath the lights. Not controlling the moment, protecting it. A white Southern superstar intentionally stepping backward so black voices could occupy center stage in Alabama during 1969. That image struck the audience harder than speeches ever could. Near the front rows, an older white man slowly removed his hat and held it against his chest while listening. A teenage boy wiped tears quickly before his friends noticed. A woman near the aisle closed her eyes completely, as though surrendering to something emotionally unavoidable, because the truth filling the room had become impossible to deny. The voices rising through the arena were beautiful, and hatred suddenly sounded very small beside them. When the song ended, silence hit first. Then the standing ovation arrived like an explosion. People screamed, cried, clapped above their heads until palms turned red. The sweet inspirations embraced one another tightly, while tears streamed freely down their faces now. Myrna Smith later admitted it was the first time in her entire career she truly felt seen instead of merely tolerated. Elvis slowly walked back toward the microphone, but something about him looked different now. Less like a superstar, more like a man who already accepted consequences before they fully arrived. And deep backstage, Colonel Parker realized the same horrifying truth. There was no undoing tonight anymore. The concert continued after the standing ovation. Technically, music resumed. The band played. Elvis Presley smiled occasionally for the crowd. But nobody inside the Montgomery Coliseum truly believed they were attending an ordinary concert anymore. Something irreversible had happened beneath those lights. The atmosphere changed permanently. Earlier that night, people came seeking entertainment. Now the building felt emotionally divided straight down the center. One side inspired, one side furious. And somewhere inside the furious side, men sat quietly carrying the dangerous kind of anger born when long-held beliefs suddenly feel threatened publicly. Security understood it immediately. Guards repositioned themselves closer to the stage. Several remained near the lower aisles, watching specific audience members who refused to sit down or stop shouting under their breath. One backstage technician later admitted he genuinely expected violence before the night ended. Not because people hated music, because music had stopped being the issue. Now the issue was dignity, and dignity always frightens systems built on hierarchy. Backstage, during a short transition between songs, Colonel Parker finally confronted Elvis directly. The colonel grabbed Elvis's arm near the curtain, hard enough to wrinkle the sleeve of the white suit. "What the hell are you doing?" Parker hissed. No cameras nearby now, no audience, no need for charm. "You're turning concerts into politics." Elvis looked exhausted already. Sweat soaked through the collar of his suit. His breathing remained uneven from performance and pressure mixed together. But when he answered, his voice stayed calm. "I didn't start this." Parker stepped closer. "You think sponsors care who started it?" Another pause. "You think Alabama cares?" Elvis slowly removed the colonel's hand from his sleeve, not aggressively, firmly. Then he said the sentence Parker feared most that night. "I'm tired of pretending not to hear things." The colonel stared at him silently for several seconds, because deep down he understood something terrifying. This was not publicity anymore. This was conviction. And conviction is dangerous because it cannot be negotiated cleanly with money. Meanwhile, inside a small backstage dressing room, the sweet inspirations sat together emotionally drained. Nobody spoke for a while. The adrenaline crash after surviving fear had finally begun. Myrna Smith removed one earring slowly because her hands still trembled slightly. Sylvia Shemwell leaned forward with elbows against her knees, staring silently at the floor. Estelle Brown sat near the mirror, trying to repair makeup ruined by tears earlier. And Cissy Houston, who spent years surviving through emotional restraint, finally cried openly once the room became private. Not dramatic crying, exhausted crying. The kind arriving after the body realizes danger has passed enough to release tension. Myrna looked toward the hallway outside where Elvis's voice echoed faintly through the stage monitors. "Why'd he do it?" she whispered softly. Nobody answered immediately, because the question carried too much weight. Finally, Cissy wiped beneath her eyes carefully and spoke. "Because he heard it." Another pause, and decided hearing it wasn't enough. The room fell quiet again afterward. Outside, 35,000 people still waited for Elvis Presley to continue entertaining them. But backstage, 5 exhausted human beings were trying to process the fact that a concert nearly became a riot because one man refused silence. The next morning, America exploded. Newspapers across the South carried headlines describing controversy inside the Montgomery Coliseum. Some praised Elvis Presley courageously. Others accused him of betraying Southern audiences. Radio stations debated whether entertainers should stay out of politics. Threatening letters arrived almost immediately. Some fans promised lifelong loyalty afterward. Others swore never to attend another Elvis show again. One Alabama newspaper columnist wrote, "Presley forgot who made him famous." Another newspaper answered 2 days later, "No, he finally remembered." The country argued endlessly, but beneath all the headlines, the deeper truth remained simpler. A racist insult had entered a room, and Elvis Presley publicly chose human dignity over comfort. That choice cost him something, and that is why people remembered it. Because courage without consequence is only performance. Real courage feels dangerous while happening. Real courage sweats beneath bright lights. Real courage hears 35,000 people waiting for the safe answer and speaks anyway. Years later, debates about Elvis Presley continued endlessly. Some critics argued he benefited enormously from black music while existing inside white America's protection. Others saw him as a bridge between worlds violently trying not to understand each other. History never simplified him completely. Perhaps it never should. Human beings complicated enough to matter rarely fit cleanly into one sentence. But even critics who questioned Elvis Presley's legacy acknowledged something important about Montgomery. On that night, when hatred demanded silence, Elvis Presley did not stay silent. Long after the arena emptied, janitors cleaned abandoned programs from beneath seats, while cigarette smoke still lingered faintly through the building. Outside, angry fans argued in parking lots for hours before driving home. Families discussed the concert all night around kitchen tables. Teenagers replayed Elvis's speech repeatedly inside their heads, and somewhere inside Montgomery, people who spent lifetimes feeling invisible remembered what happened beneath those lights forever. Because for one unforgettable night in Alabama, music stopped being entertainment. It became a line separating hate from humanity. And standing directly on that line, in a wrinkled white suit beneath impossible pressure, stood Elvis Presley.